September 6, 1976. A Soviet MiG-25 crosses into Japanese airspace. The most feared fighter jet in the world. Faster than a bullet. Built to shoot down American bombers before they could reach Moscow. The Americans have been trying to get their hands on one for years. The Soviets guard it with their lives. And today, they're about to lose it. The pilot's name is Viktor Belenko. He's 29 years old. He's one of the Soviet Air Force's best. And in approximately 90 seconds, he's going to commit the most spectacular act of defection in Cold War history. This is the story of the man who stole the USSR's most secret weapon and gave it to America as a gift. Let's go back. Because to understand why Viktor Belenko risked everything to escape, you need to understand what life was like in the Soviet Union in 1976. The Cold War is at its peak. The United States and the Soviet Union are locked in a global struggle. Both sides are building weapons. Both sides are spying on each other. Both sides are convinced the other is planning to strike first. Viktor Ivanovich Belenko was born in 1947 in the Ukrainian village of Nalchik. His childhood is about as Soviet as it gets. His father works in a factory. His mother works in a textile mill. They live in a small apartment with barely enough food to eat. But young Viktor is smart. He's ambitious. And from the moment he sees his first aircraft, he knows exactly what he wants to do with his life. He wants to fly. In the Soviet Union, this isn't a simple dream. Flying isn't something you just do because you love airplanes. Flying is a privilege reserved for the most loyal, most trusted members of Soviet society. To become a pilot, you need perfect grades, perfect health, perfect political credentials. And most importantly, you need to be absolutely, unquestionably loyal to the Communist Party. Viktor checks all the boxes. He joins the Young Communist League. He studies hard. He keeps his mouth shut about anything that could be considered politically questionable. He plays the game perfectly. At age 18, he's accepted into the Soviet Air Force. He's sent to flight school. The training is brutal. It's not just about learning to fly. It's about becoming a perfect Soviet officer. About learning to follow orders without question. About being willing to die for the motherland at a moment's notice. Viktor excels. He's a natural pilot. His instructors notice. He's smart, disciplined, and fearless. Exactly the kind of pilot the Soviet Union needs. By 1971, Viktor is flying the MiG-21. It's a good aircraft. Fast, maneuverable, deadly. But it's nothing compared to what's coming next. In 1975, Viktor is selected for an elite program. He's going to fly the MiG-25, the Foxbat. To understand what this means, you need to understand what the MiG-25 represented. This wasn't just another fighter jet. This was the aircraft that terrified the West. The MiG-25 was designed in the early 1960s as a response to American bombers. The Soviet designers had a simple goal: build an interceptor that could catch anything the Americans could throw at it. Speed was everything. It needed to be fast enough to intercept American bombers before they could reach Soviet cities. So the designers built a monster. The MiG-25 could fly at Mach 2.8. That's nearly 3 times the speed of sound. Over 2,100 miles per hour. At that speed, it could cross the entire Soviet Union in less than 2 hours. It could fly at altitudes over 80,000 feet. Higher than almost any other aircraft in the world. So high that pilots could see the curvature of the Earth. It was powered by 2 massive R-15 engines. Each one generated over 24,000 pounds of thrust. Together, they turned the MiG-25 into a rocket with wings. The Americans were scared. They saw the MiG-25 at air shows. They tracked it on radar. They knew it was fast. They knew it was powerful. But they didn't know how it worked. They didn't know its weaknesses. They didn't know if their own fighters could beat it in combat. American intelligence spent millions trying to learn about the MiG-25. They tried to recruit Soviet engineers. They analyzed photographs. They tracked every piece of intelligence they could find. But the Soviets guarded the aircraft like a state secret. Because that's exactly what it was. For Viktor Belenko, being selected to fly the MiG-25 should have been the proudest moment of his life. He was joining an elite group. He was trusted with the Soviet Union's most advanced weapon. He had access to technology that the rest of the world could only dream about. But something was wrong. The more Victor flew the MiG-25, the more he understood that something was deeply broken about the Soviet system. The aircraft itself was a revelation. Flying at Mach 2.8 was like nothing else. The power was incredible. The speed was intoxicating. For those brief moments in the cockpit, Victor felt like he was touching the edge of space. But on the ground, reality was different. The base where Victor was stationed was in the Far East, near the border with Japan. It was isolated, cold, miserable. The living conditions were terrible. The officers lived in cramped apartments. The food was bad. Medical care was almost non-existent. But that wasn't what bothered Victor. What bothered him was the lies. The Soviet propaganda told everyone that life in the USSR was paradise. That Soviet workers lived better than anyone in the West. That the communist system had created a utopia. Victor knew this was nonsense. He'd seen the poverty. He'd seen the corruption. He'd seen how party officials lived in luxury while ordinary people struggled to find basic necessities. And he'd seen enough to know that the West wasn't the enemy the Soviet propaganda claimed it was. He'd listened to foreign radio broadcasts. He'd seen smuggled magazines. He'd talked to people who had traveled abroad. He knew that people in the West lived better, that they were free to speak their minds, that they weren't constantly watched by the secret police. Victor started to have dangerous thoughts. What if everything he'd been told was a lie? What if the Soviet system wasn't the pinnacle of human achievement? What if there was a better life waiting somewhere else? These thoughts were dangerous. In the Soviet Union, doubt was treason. Questioning the party was a crime. Even thinking about defecting could get you sent to a labor camp. Or worse. But Victor couldn't stop thinking about it. Every day, he flew one of the most powerful aircraft in the world. And every day, he came home to a system that was failing its people. The contradictions were everywhere. Victor and his fellow pilots were supposed to be elite. They were the defenders of the motherland. They were trusted with the most advanced technology the Soviet Union could produce. But they lived in terrible conditions. The heating barely worked in winter. The plumbing constantly broke. Medical care was so poor that pilots had to bribe doctors for basic treatment. Food was scarce and of terrible quality. Meanwhile, party officials lived in luxury. They had nice apartments. They had access to special stores where they could buy Western goods. They sent their children to the best schools. They vacationed at resorts on the Black Sea. Victor saw all of this, and he couldn't reconcile it with what he'd been taught. If communism was about equality, why did party members live so much better than everyone else? If the Soviet system was superior, why were people so poor? There was another issue. Victor was married. His wife Ludmila was a good communist. She believed in the system. She believed the propaganda. And she was starting to suspect that Victor was having doubts. This put Victor in a dangerous position. In the Soviet Union, family members were expected to report suspicious behavior, even between husbands and wives. Especially between husbands and wives. The KGB encouraged people to inform on their own relatives. Victor couldn't tell Ludmila what he was planning. He couldn't tell anyone. If word got out that he was planning to defect, he'd be arrested immediately. His career would be over. His life would be over. So he kept his plans secret. He played the role of the loyal Soviet officer. He attended party meetings. He denounced the West. He praised the wisdom of the communist leadership, all while secretly planning his escape. The psychological toll was enormous. Victor was living a double life. Publicly, he was a model Soviet citizen. Privately, he was planning the ultimate betrayal. He had nightmares. He imagined being caught. He imagined being interrogated by the KGB. He imagined being executed as a traitor. But he couldn't turn back. The idea of spending the rest of his life trapped in the Soviet system was worse than the risk of trying to escape. He made a decision that would change his life and alter the course of the Cold War. He was going to defect, and he was going to take the MiG-25 with him. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. Victor planned carefully. He knew that defecting would be almost impossible. Soviet pilots were never allowed to fly near borders. Their routes were carefully monitored. Ground control tracked every movement. Any deviation from the flight plan would trigger an immediate response. But Victor had an advantage. He flew out of Chuguyevka Air Base, near the Soviet border with Japan. On a clear day, from 80,000 feet, he could see the Japanese coast. It was tantalizingly close. Just a few hundred miles. Victor studied maps. He memorized flight paths. He calculated fuel consumption. He figured out exactly how far he could fly on a full tank. The MiG-25 had a range of about 1,000 miles. Chuguyevka to Japan was less than 500 miles. It was possible. Barely. But there were problems. Huge problems. First, he needed a legitimate reason to be in the air. He couldn't just request permission to fly toward Japan. That would trigger immediate suspicion. Second, he needed to avoid Soviet air defense. The moment he deviated from his flight plan, every radar station in the region would light up. Fighter jets would be scrambled to intercept him. Ground-to-air missiles would be armed. Third, he needed to make sure the Japanese didn't shoot him down. He'd be flying a Soviet military aircraft into Japanese airspace without warning. They might think it was an attack. Victor knew he'd only get one chance. If he failed, he'd be dead. Either shot down by Soviet fighters or captured and executed as a traitor. He waited for the perfect opportunity. September 6, 1976. Victor is scheduled for a routine training flight. Nothing unusual. Just another day of practice maneuvers over the Sea of Japan. He goes through his pre-flight checklist. Everything is normal. Ground control gives him clearance. He taxis to the runway. This is it. This is the moment. If he's going to do this, it has to be now. Victor's heart is pounding. His hands are steady on the controls, but his mind is racing. He's about to commit treason against the Soviet Union. He's about to steal the most secret aircraft in the Soviet arsenal. He's about to risk his life for a chance at freedom. The tower clears him for takeoff. Victor pushes the throttles forward. The twin engines roar. The MiG-25 accelerates down the runway. Liftoff. He's airborne. The ground falls away beneath him. He climbs through the clouds. Ground control is tracking him. Everything looks normal. Just another training flight. Victor follows his assigned route. He's flying over the Sea of Japan. From ground control's perspective, everything is routine. Just another loyal Soviet pilot doing his job. But inside the cockpit, Victor is preparing. He's running through his plan one more time. He's calculating distances. He's checking fuel levels. He's preparing for the moment when he'll turn toward Japan and never look back. He climbs to 30,000 feet, then 40,000, then 50,000. At this altitude, the sky is a deep purple blue. The horizon curves. He can see for hundreds of miles in every direction. And there, in the distance, is Japan. Victor takes a deep breath. This is it. He banks hard to the right. The MiG-25 responds instantly. He's now flying directly toward Japanese airspace. Directly away from Soviet territory. On the ground, alarm bells are screaming. Every radar operator within 500 miles has just watched a Soviet fighter deviate from its flight plan and head toward Japan at maximum speed. Ground control is shouting at him over the radio. They're demanding he return to base immediately. They're threatening him. They're trying to figure out what's happening. Victor switches off his radio. He doesn't need to hear them anymore. Two Soviet fighters are scrambled to intercept him. They're ordered to force him to land. Or, if necessary, to shoot him down. But they're too late. Victor is already too far away. And the MiG-25 is faster than anything they can send after him. They'll never catch him. Victor pushes the throttles to maximum. The engines scream. The MiG-25 accelerates past Mach 2. The coast of Japan is getting closer. He's done it. He's actually done it. He's escaped. But now comes the dangerous part. He's flying a Soviet military aircraft into Japanese airspace. The Japanese self-defense force doesn't know who he is or what he wants. They might think this is an attack. They might shoot him down. Victor doesn't have much fuel left. He can see Hokkaido, the northernmost island of Japan, ahead of him. He needs to land. Now, he spots Hakodate Airport. It's a civilian airport, not a military base. Perfect. He's not trying to start a war. He's trying to defect. He descends rapidly. He's coming in fast. Too fast. The MiG-25 wasn't designed for gentle landings at civilian airports. It was designed to land on military runways with specialized equipment. But Victor is one of the best pilots in the Soviet Air Force. He can make this work. The air traffic controllers at Hakodate are in a panic. They're seeing a Soviet military fighter approaching at high speed. They're evacuating the terminal. They're calling the military. Victor extends the landing gear. He lines up with the runway. He's coming in hot. Way too hot. But he doesn't have a choice. Touchdown. The tires screech. Victor hits the brakes. Hard. The MiG-25 is still going way too fast. The runway is too short. He's going to overshoot. But somehow, miraculously, the aircraft stops. Just barely. He's at the far end of the runway, but he's stopped. Victor shuts down the engines. The sudden silence is deafening. For a moment, he just sits there in the cockpit. He's done it. He's actually done it. He's in Japan. He's free. He opens the canopy. Japanese police and military are already surrounding the aircraft. They're pointing guns at him. They're shouting. They don't know if he's attacking or defecting. Victor stands up in the cockpit. He raises his hands. He shouts the only English words he knows. I want asylum. I want asylum. The Japanese military can't believe what they're seeing. A Soviet pilot just landed a MiG-25 at a civilian airport and is asking for asylum. This is unprecedented. They take Victor into custody. Not as a prisoner, but for his own protection. They need to figure out what to do. This is a massive diplomatic incident. The Soviets are going to be furious. And they are. Within hours, the Soviet Union issues an official statement. They claim Viktor Belenko is mentally unstable. They claim he stole the aircraft. They demand the immediate return of both the pilot and the plane. But Victor isn't going back. The Japanese hold him while American intelligence officials rush to Hokkaido. They want to talk to him. They want to examine the MiG-25. This is the intelligence coup of the century. Victor meets with CIA officers. He tells them everything. He tells them about Soviet air bases, about training procedures, about weaknesses in Soviet air defense. But most importantly, he gives them access to the MiG-25. American engineers arrive at Hakodate. They begin a detailed examination of the aircraft. They photograph every component. They measure every dimension. They analyze every system. What they find is shocking. The MiG-25 isn't the super fighter they thought it was. It's fast, yes. It's powerful, yes. But it's not invincible. The first surprise is the construction. American engineers expect titanium or advanced aluminum alloys. What they find is steel. Lots of steel. The MiG-25 is built like a tank with wings. It's incredibly heavy. The empty weight is over 44,000 pounds. Compare that to an F-15 Eagle, which weighs about 28,000 pounds empty. Why steel? Because the Soviets didn't have access to enough titanium, and the aircraft needed to withstand the heat generated by flying at Mach 2.8. Steel is cheap, readily available, and can handle high temperatures. But it's also heavy and inefficient. The engines are massive R15BD300 turbojets. Each one generates 24,675 pounds of thrust with afterburner. They're powerful, but they're also incredibly inefficient. They guzzle fuel at an alarming rate. The MiG-25 can only stay airborne for about 90 minutes before it runs out of fuel. And that's at subsonic speeds. At maximum speed, the fuel lasts even less time. The avionics are primitive by Western standards. The radar is powerful. It can detect targets at long range, but it's based on vacuum tube technology. Vacuum tubes. The Americans are using transistors and integrated circuits. The Soviets are still using technology from the 1950s. Why vacuum tubes? Because they're more resistant to electromagnetic pulse from nuclear explosions. The Soviets designed the MiG-25 to operate in a nuclear war environment. Vacuum tubes would keep working when modern electronics would fail. But they're also bulky, power-hungry, and require frequent maintenance. The weapon systems are crude. The missiles are powerful but inaccurate. The fire control system is unsophisticated. An experienced American pilot in an F-15 or F-14 would have significant advantages in a dogfight. But here's the most revealing discovery. The MiG-25 can't actually fly at Mach 2.8 for extended periods. If you push the engines that hard, they start to destroy themselves. The operating manual specifically warns pilots not to exceed Mach 2.5 except in extreme emergencies. And even then, the engines will need to be replaced after such a flight. The operational reality is that the MiG-25 typically cruises at around Mach 2.2. It's still incredibly fast, but it's not the unstoppable super interceptor the West feared. The Americans also discover tactical limitations. The MiG-25 can't maneuver well at high speeds. The control surfaces aren't sophisticated enough. In a turning fight, it would lose to more agile Western fighters. Its strength is pure speed in a straight line. That's it. The examination takes months. American engineers create detailed technical drawings. They analyze the metallurgy. They reverse engineer the systems. They figure out exactly how the Soviets built this aircraft and, more importantly, why they built it the way they did. The conclusions are sobering for the Soviet Union. The MiG-25 represents the best the Soviet aerospace industry can produce. And it's built with outdated technology, crude systems, and significant compromises. The myth of Soviet technological superiority is shattered. The Americans learn invaluable lessons. They figure out how to detect the MiG-25 more effectively. They understand its limitations. They can develop tactics to counter it. After 2 months of examination, the Americans disassemble the MiG-25, pack it into crates, and return it to the Soviet Union. But they've learned everything they needed to know. Viktor Belenko, meanwhile, is granted asylum in the United States. He's debriefed extensively by American intelligence. He provides detailed information about Soviet military capabilities, training prost, about training procedures, about weaknesses in Soviet air defense. But most importantly, he gives them access to the MiG-25. American engineers arrive at Hakodate. They begin a detailed examination of the aircraft. They photograph every component. They measure every dimension. They analyze every system. What they find is shocking. The MiG-25 isn't the super fighter they thought it was. It's fast, yes. It's powerful, yes. But it's not invincible. The first surprise is the construction. American engineers expect titanium or advanced aluminum alloys. What they find is steel. Lots of steel. The MiG-25 is built like a tank with wings. It's incredibly heavy. The empty weight is over 44,000 pounds. Compare that to an F-15 Eagle, which weighs about 28,000 pounds empty. Why steel? Because the Soviets didn't have access to enough titanium, and the aircraft needed to withstand the heat generated by flying at Mach 2.8. Steel is cheap, readily available, and can handle high temperatures. But it's also heavy and inefficient. The engines are massive R-15BD-300 turbojets. Each one generates 24,675 pounds of thrust with afterburner. They're powerful, but they're also incredibly inefficient. They guzzle fuel at an alarming rate. The MiG-25 can only stay airborne for about 90 minutes before it runs out of fuel. And that's at subsonic speeds. At maximum speed, the fuel lasts even less time. The avionics are primitive by Western standards. The radar is powerful, it can detect targets at long range, but it's based on vacuum tube technology. Vacuum tubes. The Americans are using transistors and integrated circuits. The Soviets are still using technology from the 1950s. Why vacuum tubes? Because they're more resistant to electromagnetic pulse from nuclear explosions. The Soviets designed the MiG-25 to operate in a nuclear war environment. Vacuum tubes would keep working when modern electronics would fail. But they're also bulky, power-hungry, and require frequent maintenance. The weapon systems are crude. The missiles are powerful but inaccurate. The fire control system is unsophisticated. An experienced American pilot in an F-15 or F-14 would have significant advantages in a dogfight. But here's the most revealing discovery. The MiG-25 can't actually fly at Mach 2.8 for extended periods. If you push the engines that hard, they start to destroy themselves. The operating manual specifically warns pilots not to exceed Mach 2.5 except in extreme emergencies. And even then, the engines will need to be replaced after such a flight. The operational reality is that the MiG-25 typically cruises at around Mach 2.2. It's still incredibly fast, but it's not the unstoppable super interceptor the West feared. The Americans also discover tactical limitations. The MiG-25 can't maneuver well at high speeds. The control surfaces aren't sophisticated enough. In a turning fight, it would lose to more agile Western fighters. Its strength is pure speed in a straight line. That's it. The examination takes months. American engineers create detailed technical drawings. They analyze the metallurgy. They reverse engineer the systems. They figure out exactly how the Soviets built this aircraft and, more importantly, why they built it the way they did. The conclusions are sobering for the Soviet Union. The MiG-25 represents the best the Soviet aerospace industry can produce. And it's built with outdated technology, crude systems, and significant compromises. The myth of Soviet technological superiority is shattered. The Americans learn invaluable lessons. They figure out how to detect the MiG-25 more effectively. They understand its limitations. They can develop tactics to counter it. After 2 months of examination, the Americans disassemble the MiG-25, pack it into crates, and return it to the Soviet Union. But they've learned everything they needed to know. Viktor Belenko, meanwhile, is granted asylum in the United States. He's debriefed extensively by American intelligence. He provides detailed information about Soviet military capabilities, training procedures, and strategic thinking. The debriefing lasts for months. CIA and Air Force intelligence officers ask Viktor thousands of questions. They want to know everything, not just about the MiG-25, but about Soviet tactics, about pilot training, about base security, about weaknesses in Soviet air defense. Viktor tells them everything. He holds nothing back. He describes how Soviet pilots are trained. He explains the command structure. He reveals the locations of secret bases. He identifies vulnerabilities in Soviet radar systems. He provides details about Soviet nuclear doctrine. This information is priceless. It allows American military planners to develop more effective strategies. It helps them understand how the Soviet military actually operates, not how propaganda claims it operates. Viktor is given a new identity. He's relocated to a safe location in the United States. The CIA provides him with financial support. He's given a chance to start a new life. But starting over isn't easy. Viktor is 29 years old. He's in a completely foreign country. He doesn't speak English well. He has no family, no friends, no support network. Everything he knew is gone. He has to learn English. He has to learn American customs. He has to adapt to a completely different way of life. The freedom he longed for comes with challenges he didn't anticipate. There's also the psychological burden. Viktor knows that his defection has consequences for people he left behind. His family is interrogated by the KGB. His fellow pilots are investigated. Some are punished for failing to report his suspicious behavior. He carries guilt about this for the rest of his life. But he also knows he made the right choice. As the years pass, Viktor builds a life in America. He learns English. He gets a job as an aerospace consultant. He shares his expertise with American companies developing new aircraft. His insights about Soviet design philosophy and operational concepts prove valuable. In 1980, Viktor publishes a book about his experiences called MiG Pilot. It becomes a bestseller. For the first time, ordinary Americans get a first-hand account of what life is really like in the Soviet Union. Not from propaganda, not from politicians, but from someone who lived it. The book describes the poverty, the corruption, the fear, the propaganda. It describes how Soviet citizens are constantly watched, how they're encouraged to inform on each other, how even private conversations can lead to arrest, how the Soviet system destroys individual initiative and punishes independent thinking. Viktor becomes a sought-after speaker. He gives lectures at military academies, at think tanks, at universities. He helps Americans understand the Soviet Union from the inside. His perspective is valuable because he's not a politician or a propagandist. He's just a man who wanted freedom and was willing to risk everything to get it. He eventually becomes an American citizen. He marries. He builds a normal life. He gets to experience the freedom he risked his life for. He can speak his mind without fear. He can travel where he wants. He can read what he wants. He can live without constantly looking over his shoulder. Viktor lives quietly in America for decades. He avoids publicity. He doesn't seek fame. He just wants to live the ordinary life that was impossible in the Soviet Union. He watches as the Cold War continues through the 1980s. He watches as new American fighters are developed based partly on lessons learned from examining his MiG-25. He watches as the strategic balance shifts. And then, in 1991, he watches something he never thought he'd see. The Soviet Union collapses. The system he fled from disintegrates. The ideology that claimed to represent the future of humanity is relegated to the dustbin of history. Victor outlives the Soviet Union by decades. He gets to see the Iron Curtain fall. He gets to see former Soviet states become free democracies. He gets to see people who grew up under communism experience the freedom he risked everything to reach. His defection becomes a footnote in Cold War history. But it's an important footnote. It represents a turning point in how the West understood Soviet military capabilities. It exposed weaknesses that shaped American strategy for years. More importantly, it reminds us that individual courage matters. That one person willing to risk everything can make a difference. That freedom is worth fighting for, worth fleeing for, worth risking your life for. The Soviet Union is humiliated. Their most secret aircraft has been exposed. All its weaknesses are now known. Soviet military planners have to assume that everything about the MiG-25 is now compromised. They respond by executing several officers for allowing the defection to happen. They redesign security procedures. They develop new versions of the MiG-25 to address the weaknesses the Americans discovered. But the damage is done. The myth of Soviet technological superiority has been shattered. The MiG-25, the aircraft that was supposed to be invincible, has been exposed as obsolete. Victor's defection changes more than just military intelligence. It provides the West with a window into Soviet society. Victor tells his interrogators about the corruption, the poverty, the propaganda, the fear. He provides a first-hand account of what life is really like behind the Iron Curtain. This information is valuable because it confirms what many suspected but couldn't prove. The Soviet system is rotting from within. The economy is failing. The people are losing faith. The propaganda about Soviet superiority is just that propaganda. Viktor Belenko lives quietly in the United States for decades. He works as a consultant. He writes a book about his experiences. He becomes an American citizen. He builds the life he dreamed about during those long flights over the Soviet Far East. The MiG-25 continues to serve in various air forces around the world. But it's never again seen as the unbeatable superfighter. It's understood for what it really is, a fast interceptor with significant limitations. Victor's defection is one of many that occurred during the Cold War. But it's perhaps the most spectacular. Most defectors escape with documents, or information, or their own expertise. Victor escaped with an entire aircraft. He literally flew the Soviet Union's most secret weapon to freedom. The Cold War eventually ends. The Soviet Union collapses in 1991. The ideological struggle that defined the second half of the 20th century fades into history. Viktor Belenko outlives the system he fled. He gets to see the Soviet Union collapse. He gets to see the people he left behind finally gain the freedoms he risked his life to reach. His story reminds us of something important. Freedom isn't just an abstract concept. It's something real. Something worth risking everything for. Victor had everything the Soviet system could offer: status, respect, access to advanced technology. But it wasn't enough. Because without freedom, none of it mattered. On September 6, 1976, a 29-year-old pilot made a choice. He chose freedom over security. He chose truth over propaganda. He chose to risk his life rather than live a lie. And in doing so, he changed history. The MiG-25 that Victor flew to Japan was eventually returned to the Soviet Union. But the intelligence it provided shaped Western military strategy for decades. The lessons learned from examining that aircraft influenced the design of American fighters that are still flying today. Viktor Belenko proved that even the most closely guarded secrets can be revealed. That even the most powerful weapons can be understood. And that sometimes, one person with courage can change the course of history. He was a Soviet pilot who became an American hero. A man who stole the USSR's most feared weapon and gave it to the West as a gift. A defector who helped end the Cold War by exposing the truth about Soviet technology. His story is a reminder that freedom is never free. That courage sometimes means giving up everything you know for something you believe in. And that sometimes, the most powerful weapon isn't a fighter jet flying at Mach 2.8. It's the truth. Viktor Belenko didn't just defect. He exposed a lie that the Soviet Union had been telling for decades. He showed the world that the mighty Soviet military machine was built on outdated technology and held together by fear. And he did it by flying straight toward freedom at 3 times the speed of sound.